Hi, John Morris here, and in this video we're going to be talking basic syntax. And we're going to talk about the syntax for HTML, CSS, and PHP, which are the three different programming languages that we'll be using primarily when building websites. And so first, to start off, let's just talk a little bit about what each one of those does. And in essence, first off, HTML essentially is for structuring. It's going to allow you to actually structure your site. It's kind of like the bones of your site, if you were to put it that way. CSS is kind of like if you were to put clothes on, say, a mannequin or whatever. It's kind of like the clothes. It's the dressing. It's what makes it look good. And then PHP would be kind of like internal organs. It's what makes the website dynamic and interactive and makes it work and actually do things. So those are just a little bit about how PHP, CSS, and HTML work together to create a website. I don't want to get too much into that now. Most what I want to do is cover some of the syntax, the basic syntax that we're going to be using as we go throughout the course. So this is kind of a basic course or a basic lesson. If you already know this stuff, then you may not need to even watch this video. However, if you're really brand new, then this will kind of get you integrated into how these actual languages actually work. So to start off, we'll just start off with HTML. And so you're going to use, when you're building sites, I'm going to cover the major things that you're going to be using, and you'll see that what we learn in covering those kind of plays out throughout all of HTML code. So one of the very first ones, the big ones that you're going to be using, is what's called a div. Right? And a div is essentially a box. And if you know anything about webs, in the past we used to use tables, and now we more use these divs because they're easier to structure, they're more flexible. But a div is essentially the new fancy version of a table, and creates a box on your site. And so if we were to create this div and we were to go like this, this is actually a div. So you have your opening tag, this is what starts the div, and then you have your closing tag, this is what ends it. So anything inside of here would be inside of this box that we've created. Now the thing about divs is, by default, they have no structure, they have no color, they don't have anything defined to them. You actually have to use CSS to define the styling for them. So what we'll do is, in order to style this div, we'll add this code to it, style equals, and then open quotation. And then this is where we're going to get into some of the CSS, where we add some different attributes to this div to give it structure and color and all the design elements that we want it to have. So let's just do something simple, and that's, we'll give it a width of 500 pixels, and we'll give it a border of 1 pixel, a solid border, and we'll make that black. Okay. Now you don't have to get too wrapped up in this right now, because this is more CSS stuff right now, but this is just going to allow us so we can actually see this div and what we're working with. So if we save this, and then I'm going to upload this to our test site here, and we'll go to that test site and we'll reload this page. You can see now we actually have what looks like a line. And it has a width, which would be 500 pixels. Now, why is it a line? Well, because we didn't give it any height. Okay, so we want to come in here and give this a height of 500 pixels. Okay, and if we go back, we upload that to our site, and we refresh. Now you can see we've got a box with width and height. So divs are going to be kind of the basic building blocks of your website. Everything that you see on a website on the web has typically has a div behind it. Now there's people out there that are probably still using tables, but for all intents and purposes, it's going to have divs behind it that are creating the structure. So when you look at a website, really, if you want to break down how it's put together, you need to look at it in terms of boxes like this that come together to actually create that site. And so if we were to then create kind of a site like you might see today, just to give you an example here to see how sites come together doing this, then we would say let's have 2 divs and give this one a style, and we'll make the width 300 pixels, height 500 pixels, same border. I'll actually just copy all this. So you'll notice the only thing we changed was the width, okay? Everything else is the same. And then we'll close this and we'll upload this to our site. And we'll refresh. And now you can see you have kind of what is a basic structure that you see a lot throughout the web, which is on the left here you have kind of a left content area, and on the right you have kind of like a sidebar area. Then of course you could add in other divs for, say, a header, if you want to add a header here up at the top, or if you wanted to add a footer down here at the bottom, then you could do that as well. And you just add more divs. And so these divs again allow us to create the basic structure of our site. As you can see, it's kind of like the skin and bones of a site. It's just the very basic structural elements. Now, to get more into HTML, let's go ahead and when you're creating a site, most of your content's actually going to go inside of different divs. So let's say that we want to add a title to our content box. So we'll add in a title. And what I'm using here is called an H1 tag, and H stands for heading. And so you have a bunch of different heading tags. You could have H1, H2, H3, H4, and on down the line. And essentially the way they work is each heading tag is going to have a little bit different size to it. So this heading 1 is going to be the largest. And then let's say you want to add some text. So we'll put, this is our text for our content area. And what I'm adding these inside of it are called paragraph tags. And these paragraph tags essentially give the text a form and give it some kind of structure so that it's not just out there in plain text. So by wrapping it in this, and also again you could come into each one of these just like we did with our div, and you can do style equals, and you can style it just like we did both in the H1 and this paragraph tag. If you don't add the paragraph tags to it, well then you can't do that. So adding these tags also gives you the ability to style the different elements. So let's go ahead and upload this again, and we'll go back to our site, we'll refresh. Now you can see we have our title, and this is our content area. Okay, so now we've got we're starting to develop a little bit of a structure like you might see on the web. And so if you look in now at the structure as far as HTML, the syntax, you can see that you have, typically you're going to have an opening tag and you're going to have a closing tag. And the difference between the two is the closing tag is going to have this little slash before the words, like right here, before div, before H1, before P. Okay, so this is 99% of HTML is structured this way. There are some exceptions, but majority of HTML is structured this way. For example, you may have in your life written a hyperlink. So hyperlinks begin with an A, like this, and then typically you're going to give it some sort of link. So you're going to write the link, www.mylink.com, right? And you're going to close that. You're going to put some text in here, and then you're going to close it again. If you look at it, the structure for this is actually, it's exactly the same. If you have your opening A here, you have your closing A here. Now if we were to get rid of this HREF in here, right, it would look just like a paragraph tag, except it's an A instead of a P. The difference is just like with our div up here where we added the style, we add some attributes to a link, and pretty much all links come with an attribute of this HREF, which is a hyperlink reference. So that attribute is just telling the browser what URL to link to when someone clicks that link. Okay, so again, it's all basic structure that you have here. And if we upload this to our site and we come in here and we refresh, you can see we have our link. And down, if you look down here, when I hover that link, you'll see it's the link that we put in, mylink.com. So again, that's basic structure for HTML. And it's really simple. You have opening tags and you have closing tags. Now, one of the non-standard ones that you'll run into a lot that I'm going to cover is what's called an image tag. Okay, and this is how you insert images. So an image tag is what uses what's called a self-closing tag. So again, we open it pretty much similar to all these other ones. We have image, then we're going to put a source, and this is going to be the URL that our picture is actually stored at. And so we'll just say mypicture.com/picture.jpg. We don't actually have a picture there, obviously, so it's not going to show up, but just to show you the basic structure. Now, what I mean by a self-closing tag is typically you would close this just like this, and that would be it. There's no closing image tag like that. You don't write that. Okay, so it's just the opening tag by itself, and that will display the image. Now this is a little bit non-standard because most HTML has this closing tag on it as well. So what we do with HTML now is we create what's called a self-closing tag. We put a space here and then we put a slash, which mirrors this kind of slash right here, and it lets the browser know that this is a self-closed tag. So there's no opening and closing. It's just one tag that closes itself. Okay, so when we talk about self-closing tags, that's what we're talking about, and an image is one of the more popular self-closing tags that you use a lot. So that's some basic HTML. Probably the majority of what you'll use when you're building a site are these elements right here. I'm not going to go into every HTML element because they all operate pretty similar to this. If you were to go out there, and I really encourage you to go out there and do some of your own learning at other places where if you go out there, you'll be able to find different HTML elements that you can add into a site. And knowing the basic syntax that we've covered here, you'll be able to actually understand what those things can do and what how they work, and you'll be able to implement them into your site. So I highly encourage you to do that, but here we've covered kind of the basic syntax for you to look at. Now let's dive into CSS and CSS syntax, and you'll notice that we've already done some of this up here with this style and style equals and the open and close quotations. Now the syntax for CSS is you put the attribute and you put its value. So you have the attribute, a colon, the value, semicolon, separates all the different attributes. And so you have width, you have height, you can do the border, you can do the color, you can do all different kinds of things with CSS and using it to style different elements on your site. So here's an example of another one. We have our attribute that we want to edit for this div, which is background. Right? We want to edit the background, and then we're going to put in a color. And this is a hexadecimal color, no, actually do you. Okay, and if you don't know anything about hexadecimal color, it's just a way of being very specific about what color you want to use in code. And so it uses 6-digit numbers to do that. Now, you don't really need to memorize that. I would think that would probably be impossible anyway. If you go to Google and just Google hex color, you'll find a whole list of different color charts and color wheels that you can go to where you can find a certain color that you like, and it'll tell you the hexadecimal color. So that's all you really need to do. You don't need to try and memorize all that stuff. Just find one of those sites you like, bookmark it. Whenever you need a color, you just go there and find it. So obviously some that you're going to learn as you go, like black, and this is kind of a gray color. So let's go ahead and upload this. We've got our attribute, and we've got colon, we've got the value, and and then we've got a semicolon. Okay, so that's kind of the basic syntax when you're using CSS. And so we'll upload this to our site, and we'll come over here, and we'll refresh, and you'll see that now our background is gray. Okay, so essentially with CSS it's really simple. You can come through here and you can do, you can add in all these different attributes, and it's really similar to HTML. You don't really need to go through and learn all the CSS different attributes. You don't need to memorize them. Pretty much you can go through, and when you want to add a certain effect, you can just look it up, or you can create a reference chart with all of the different attributes you can apply listed, and then that way, when you need one, you can just look it up and see what it is. So I wouldn't get too caught up in trying to memorize everything. It's more just knowing where to look, and how to structure it. So this is one way that you can use CSS. Now another more popular way is to use what's called a style sheet, and that's where you link this to a style sheet. So I'm going to show you just a little bit about that, and to do that we're going to have to create kind of a more of a page structure, and then the next video I'm going to talk about page structure more, so don't get too caught up in this, but I just want to show you how you can use this style sheets or use style sheets to make your programming a little bit easier. So we're going to go with style.css, and we'll just leave it at that. Okay, there's another self-closing, and we'll do body. And we're going to add HTML tag here. Alright, so this is kind of a basic page structure here. And then we're going to create a new file, and we're going to call it style.css. But what we're going to do here is we're going to take these style elements, and we're just going to pull these out of here. Okay, and we're going to get rid of this style equals, and instead we're going to give this an ID. And essentially what an ID is naming this div. It's making this div different from, say, this div down here, so we can tell which div we're talking about when we go to style it. So we're going to give it an ID of box1. Okay, just to keep it simple. We'll come over here to our style sheet, and since we're using an ID, I'll explain this syntax here in just a second. More just want to show you how this works right now. Okay, and let's come back over here, and let's do the same with this. And we're going to give this an ID of box2. Okay, and let's come over here. Let's do box2. Alright, and we're going to save this as style.css. Alright, and then I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to upload again both of these to our site. And if we come back over here to our site and we refresh the page, you'll see that nothing changed. Now the reason for that, even though if you go back to our sample here, we now no longer have our style elements it's here, is because we created essentially what's a reference. So we gave this an ID or kind of a name, and that lets us identify in our style sheet that element and give it the same attributes that we had given it before. And then we simply link to that style sheet in the header of our page, and it pulls in all the information that's in this style sheet and uses it down here. Okay, so that allows you to use what's called a style sheet, and now you can keep all your styling elements separate from all your structural elements and all your code. And when you want to edit the style, you just come to the style sheet and edit it. So we're going to use that quite heavily as we go forward with designing sites. But that's kind of the scoop on CSS. And again, when you come over here, some of this as far as syntax, basic syntax for CSS, when you're creating it, when you have an ID will always start with like a pound, just like this, and then the name of the ID that you want to edit, open curling brackets, then you list your elements using the syntax that we talked about, and then a closing curly bracket. Okay, and of course you can do this all on the same line if you want, just like this. There's nothing stopping you from doing it like that. So however you want to do it. Some people do it like this, that's all they do. Some people space it out. However you want to do it, whatever works for you. But again, this is just the basic syntax that you'll need in order for that to work. As we move forward, we'll talk about some more advanced stuff like classes, and we'll be using all of these languages, so you're going to learn more about them all, but mostly what I want to talk about is basic syntax. So I think we've covered that. All right, last thing is PHP. So with PHP, there's a lot to do, a lot to learn. What I want to cover here again is just the basic syntax. So I'm going to create a PHP statement, and it's just going to be an echo statement. Okay, so this is a basic statement with PHP, and we'll go ahead and we'll upload this to our site. We refresh and you see we get, this is a PHP echo statement, and of course we come back and that's exactly what we wrote in here. And what an echo statement is it's exactly that. It essentially writes whatever it is that you put in here. So here's typically how PHP works. You're going to have your less than sign, you're going to have your question mark, and you're going to have PHP. So these are essentially your opening and closing tags for PHP. Are this is your opening tag and this is your closing tag. Okay, so you notice these are more like self-closing statements than they are like regular HTML statements, in that you open and close it inside the same tag. And then after that, you're going to have your function. Okay, so if you're researching PHP, what you're going to run into is built-in PHP functions. That's the majority of what PHP is comprised of, is different functions. Echo is one of those functions, and each function does a particular thing. So echo, it just basically prints or writes whatever value you give it. Okay, so you can, with PHP, you can write it out just like this, or you can use PHP to create a certain value, and we'll talk about this as we go, that you then echo. Okay, and then there's other functions. You could use an include, which is a function, and then when you use an include, you're going to include another file. So you might include header.php, and if you know anything about WordPress themes, then this will look familiar to you. So an include statement would look something similar to that. Again, function value, kind of like CSS, where we have our attribute and our value. Same thing with PHP, function, value, all wrapped inside PHP tags. Okay, and then when you learn what all the different functions do, then you can start to use them. Now, one thing you use quite a bit with PHP, and even just understanding just this little bit, it can be very helpful, is what's called variables. So you can actually set a variable. So let's say we want to set a variable of, we'll just call it variable. Okay, and again, variable, right, which is kind of similar to a function but not really, equals, and then value. We're going to give it a value. So we'll say this is a PHP echo statement, just like we did before. And we'll close that. Now, if we come down here, we can go echo, and we'll go variable, just like this. And we'll close that. Now we'll save this and we'll upload this to our site and we'll refresh, and you can see that our statement stays the same, okay, even though we've changed how we've done it, because we've created a variable that stores information. Variables are essentially used to store information, and then we've given it this value, and then we've asked PHP to echo that value here. And so as you can see, like, you can start to really create some interesting stuff. For example, you could create variable, and you could create variable 2, and we could give this statement, which may or may not be true. And then we can come in here and we can, let's give this period and this a period. We can echo these two variables, upload to our site, refresh, and you see I forgot to put on this. That's why it said just variable 2 instead of our statement. And so I'll upload this again. Most of the errors that you're going to have when you do PHP and CSS and HTML are going to be syntax errors, 99.9% of the time. Okay, so now you can see we have our statement. This is PHP. This is a PHP echo statement. This is fun, right, back to back. And we've created it this way. And so there's lots of things that you can start to do with your site that we'll get into. And I'm going to show you as we go how to use PHP in a very simple, basic way to make designing websites really, really easy for you. But again, this is kind of basic PHP syntax and how you can use it in different ways to create different things. So there's lots you can do with PHP, and it's going to allow your site to be interactive. You can use it to process forms, you can use it to get information from people, add information to a database, you can do all kinds of things with PHP. I mean, the entire WordPress and Joomla and Mambo and all those different programs, majority of the programs that you're going to find out there are based on PHP. So there's lots you can do with it, but it all starts with this basic syntax here. So that's some basic HTML, CSS, and PHP syntax. We're going to be using this a lot more as we go. Don't get too worked up if you don't know everything about each one right now, because now you've got the basic structure of how they work and the foundation you'll need as we go forward to be able to understand some of the stuff that we're going to do as we move forward. So I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was really helpful for you, and I will talk to you again soon in the next video.